Alright, before we start, let me show you around. Funny enough, when you don't take your car to the shop, you have plenty of money left over for new tools. Flashlight, lots of light makes it easier. Plenty of fluids, tranny fluid. I got new hardware. Some plugs. Engine support bar. And I made myself some instructions to follow. Here's the clutch. This is South Bend Stage 3 Daily. There's a spacer. This goes behind the slave cylinder. And the slave cylinder itself, it's brand new. I have to squeeze it for some reason. First thing is the air intake. Then the battery and the battery tray. This electric ratchet really makes getting these out easier. Plug up the intake there, and then move on to the shifter cables. I'm just taking off the bolts for the shifter bracket. These are the bolts at the top of the transmission case. Charge pipe needs to come out. Try to be smart here and use a plastic pry tool for these clips, and I broke every one because I'm just a really smart guy. And once I have these bolts out of the top of the transmission, you see I put them in some state-of-the-art cardboard to keep track of where they went and what order. Now the clutch line is hydraulic in this car, so that needs to come out. I'm prepared to make a mess. I have my plugs on standby. Now I can jack up the car because the rest is underneath. Now when these jack stands are maxed out, I get just below 17 inches of clearance, which is not much. It's barely enough actually to get the transmission out of this thing. So of course the front wheels need to come off. slide those underneath. Saved my little melon. Do I look like I know what I'm doing? Say yes. Anyway, now I have to get this splash shield out of the way. Then the transmission needs to be drained. Simple enough, although last time I took a bath in this transmission fluid and it does not smell good. Now the starter, it's got this bracket for the wire loom. Took a nut off and that's all that is required there. And I already took the ground lead off and a stud, so this is the positive lead coming off, and I unplugged the harness for this thing. Now it's just the bottom bolt, which just seems like it's compensating for something. I start shaking it for some reason, maybe because I'm flat broke after starting this project. So now the harness below the charge pipe needs to come out so I can finish removing the charge pipe. Two clamps and this hose is out. Yeah, I proceeded to break another 10 clips off of this charge pipe before I removed it. It took some time actually to get this out with all the loom and pipes in the way. Now this swivel socket makes quick work of these sway bar end links. I need to undo these so I can move the strut assembly out of the way. And then the lower ball joint where it connects to the control arm. These are pretty quick. Then a pry bar, because these control arms are under a bit of tension here. There's the passenger side axle. Some more 12-point bolts. I shoved a screwdriver in the rotor here to keep it from moving. And the axle cup. So funny enough, I didn't have the tool for this. That was fun figuring that out. But you need a 1/4 inch 6mm Allen and a really long 1/4 inch extension to get, it's like 8 inches into this axle cup. I'm rewarded with a oily bolt. Here's the driver's side, much easier. Now the harness needs to come off for the oil level sensor and the LSD. The top of the LSD has 2 bolts and they're completely blind, although I sniped a shot for you guys through the subframe. And I skipped the 40 minutes where I struggled to get this thing out, so here's the last 30 seconds. And here's where the LSD mated with the transmission case. I was actually upset that I scratched it, but luckily the teeth on the shaft were unscathed. I already undid the other two dog bone bolts that go into the transmission case, so this is the one that goes into the subframe. This one's on tight. I had to bust out a breaker bar. Need to fasten up the engine support bar. Next is the transmission mount. There's 6 bolts here. The electric ratchet definitely comes in handy for these all-thread bolts. A couple more on the bottom of the transmission, and then this thing is free. Now I skipped another hour of struggling. The transmission was resting on the pressure plate and the subframe, and I could not find the force or space to leverage it out, so I used a pry bar. And that was all it took. I put this thing on the ground, and there's actually just enough space for it to slide out under the car. The pressure plate takes these fun 9mm. You need a box end because it's a 12-point bolt. I was not expecting this, but luckily I had the tool for the job. And here it is, the clutch disc, which felt really flimsy. I mean, I know they're kind of supposed to be that way, but it just was odd. It's like, this is all that holds the power? And you can see the flywheel definitely has some hot spots or something. It was completely smooth, but it's definitely spotted in some areas. Yeah, and all that clutch dust and everything fell on me, got in my eyes. So that was cool. I love that part. You can see the dampening action or some play here. That's normal. Now you can see the rear main seal, which I was happy that there was no drips or anything. So slave cylinder needs to come out. I thought it was kind of neat that the pressure plate fingers had made an indentation in the front of this thing. Of course, it's completely caked in clutch dust and everything else. Still spun very, very nicely though. I take the time to clean this up. A lot of people online, when you look up tutorials for this job, they don't take the time to do this. I'm not sure why. I wouldn't want that to stay in there. Bust out my wife's toothbrush. Don't worry, I cleaned it before I put it back. And the starter here, decided to clean that too. and I accidentally wiped away its identity. Now, I don't have a bench, so I can't bench bleed this slave cylinder, but I can floor bleed it. And here's the spacer again. So this goes behind the slave. Some new thread locker on these bolts. I tried to scrub off the old thread locker, but not much came off. And of course, all these bolts are getting torqued. This is a new flywheel, single mass. This setup actually saves me 8 pounds over the stock setup. I'm trying my best to do these crisscross applesauce. And an additional 90 degrees. This part was pretty tough, just holding the flywheel in place. I have a crowbar at the bottom. See how much the entire engine is moving, torquing these. There it is, 90 degrees. I want to make sure the flywheel is nice and clean for our new clutch disc. Use the alignment tool from the kit. Pressure plate goes in with some new 13mm fasteners. These have Loctite and spring washers on them. Again, crisscrossing. Time for the transmission to return to its rightful place. Just getting this thing back onto the jack was a challenge in itself, so I'm glad I didn't try to brute force it like some guys. Although they have some space to actually get it up in there, unlike myself. So I'm jacking this thing with my foot and I have it rotated. It's not in the correct orientation, but that's the only way it'll go in. And I'll skip the part that made me cry. This was a huge struggle getting this thing in and out, so 2 thumbs up from past me. It was so satisfying putting in these case bolts, knowing that the hardest part was over. And I replaced the bolt for the driver's side axle cup. I put the LSD back in, much easier going in than out. There were a few drops of fluid that came out here. I believe that's old tranny fluid, not a huge deal. And I'm taking care of the 2 on top. Can't really see much. This axle was just in the way, kind of a pain, but I didn't want to take out the axle bolt. These also are being plus 90 degrees. One more for the case. I can hook up the harness here. Here's the passenger side axle cup, the one that was a pain. And of course it wasn't easy getting it back in. It kept stealing my bit off of my extension, so I had to mess with that for another 10 minutes. Okay, now I can replace the bolts for the transmission mount. These are all torque to yield, so I have new ones that aren't stretched. I'm pulling up the engine support, tightening it up so there's enough slack here that I'm not pulling it up by the bolts. And here comes the torque to yield. These are pretty tough, so I'm using the breaker bar to get that plus 90. Now I can remove this thing. I had already bled the clutch line and also happened to do the brakes as well, just for fun. Now I can replace the bolts for the passenger side axle. It was kind of a pain to get back in because the boot was pulling everything back, so I would hand tighten one on bottom where it was closest, rotate it to the next one and repeat. And then the final torque. Now I've got new nuts for the ball joints. Not that they really need to be replaced, but they were so cheap anyway. Figured why not. These are plus 45 degrees. I'm using a pry bar to pull down the sway bar so I can get the end link back on. And the driver's side ball joint. Now I'm putting in the top two transmission case bolts. And then the charge pipe, I have to wrangle with these hoses again. Put the starter back in. I hand tighten the stud on bottom and the one on top. This radiator hose needs to go in its clamp. Can't forget to reattach this hose for the charge pipe. This dog bone mount was a pain. I'm just starting with the bolts that go into the transmission case. Notice that I'm way off for the one that goes into the subframe and come up with a great idea of ratchet strapping the two together. Makes a terrible sound coming from the ratchet strap. But now it's close enough I can pry the mount down to get the bolt in. And tighten this bolt. I believe this is torqued to 100 foot-pounds and then plus 90 degrees. I was basically doing a pull-up underneath the car trying to get this back on. Torque up the other two, go into the transmission. Now I just need to fill up the transmission with new fluid. It doesn't have a dedicated fill port, so I'm doing it from this, I think it's the shifter spring tensioner bolt, something like that. It makes a shifter notchy. I have lightweight shockproof. This is to help with the gear lash caused by the new single mass flywheel. And then fill it up with MTLV. Now I'm just finishing up the starter, put the positive and ground leads back on, plug it back into the harness. I'm reattaching the clamp for the charge pipe. And the charge pipe itself. Now I'm beginning to reattach the harness to the charge pipe with zip ties, since I broke all of the clips that held it on originally. Start with the intake and replace the battery tray. and the battery. And here comes the rest of the intake. All that's left now is the engine cover. I can drop this thing on the ground. Just need to torque all the wheels first. And I can finally check off the last thing on my list. Obligatory smiley face, of course. Will it run and drive? That is the question. For those interested in the clutch chatter, here's what I can hear. The window is down. And outside, this is the driver's side. It was a cool day, so AC's not on. And here's what they tell you to do once you have it in. Brake-in is 500 to 550 miles. Of course, you can't slip the clutch, can't downshift. Stop and go only counts, not highway. The worst part is you can't launch the thing. How am I gonna get to Walmart? Alright, for those of you that made it to the end, thank you. I hope to have some more videos like this. See ya.